If your wife disappeared to the same place every Tuesday for 20 years, would you follow her? I used to think trust meant never asking questions. That's probably why it took me 2 decades to realize my marriage had a locked door in the middle of it. My name is Michael Carter, I'm 48 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I would have told you my wife Evelyn and I had the kind of marriage people envied. We lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Boston, in one of those tree-lined streets where every lawn looks professionally trimmed and everyone waves while walking their dogs in the morning. We had Sunday dinners together, watched old movies on Fridays, and argued over harmless things like thermostat settings and whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Nothing dramatic. Nothing suspicious. At least that's what I thought. But there was one thing about Evelyn that never changed. Every Tuesday morning at exactly 9:15, she left the house and drove downtown to the same bank. For 20 years. She never skipped it. Not once. Not during blizzards. Not during vacations. Not even the week her father died. I remember standing in our kitchen after the funeral while relatives filled the living room, and Evelyn quietly grabbed her purse and car keys. I asked her where she was going, and she kissed my cheek and said, "Just taking care of something important." Then she left for exactly 1 hour and 40 minutes before coming back with red eyes and pretending nothing happened. I should have asked questions back then. But when you love someone long enough, routines become invisible. You stop seeing them. They blend into the wallpaper of your life. Tuesday mornings became background noise. Coffee brewing. Garage door opening. Her heels clicking across the hardwood floor. Then silence. For years, I never thought about it. Until 3 weeks ago. That morning started like any other. Rain tapped against the kitchen windows while I stood making coffee in sweatpants and an old Red Sox t-shirt. Evelyn came downstairs dressed nicer than usual. Cream-colored coat. Gold earrings. Hair perfectly done. It caught my attention because she normally dressed casually on weekdays unless we were going somewhere together. Big plans at the bank? I joked. She froze for half a second. Barely noticeable. But after 23 years of marriage, you notice half seconds. Then she smiled. Something like that. The smile didn't reach her eyes. She grabbed her keys and headed toward the garage. A few seconds later, I heard the car door shut but the engine never started. I don't know why, but something felt wrong. I walked toward the garage window and looked outside. Evelyn was sitting behind the wheel gripping it so tightly her knuckles looked pale. And she was crying. Not the kind of crying where a few tears roll down your face. I mean full body shaking. Like whatever she carried inside her every Tuesday was slowly destroying her. My chest tightened immediately. I almost opened the garage door right then. But before I could move, she wiped her face, checked herself in the mirror, and forced a smile so convincing it honestly scared me. Then she backed out of the driveway like nothing happened. I stood there frozen with my coffee growing cold in my hand. Because suddenly, 20 years of Tuesdays didn't feel normal anymore. They felt rehearsed. And for the first time in my marriage, I had the horrible feeling that I didn't actually know where my wife was going. For the next 6 days, I could not stop thinking about the look on Evelyn's face in the garage. It followed me everywhere. At work. In the shower. Lying awake beside her at night while she slept peacefully inches away from me. Or at least pretended to. I started replaying memories in my head like scenes from an old movie I suddenly realized I had misunderstood. Every Tuesday excuse. Every rushed goodbye. Every unexplained mood afterward. Once your mind starts connecting dots, it becomes impossible to stop. By Thursday, I found myself doing something I had never done before in 23 years of marriage. I checked Evelyn's purse. Even now, admitting that makes me feel ashamed. But suspicion changes people. It turns ordinary husbands into detectives. I waited until she was upstairs folding laundry before quietly opening her handbag on the kitchen counter. Wallet. Lipstick. Gum. Hand lotion. Nothing unusual. Then I found a white envelope folded beneath her planner. It was thick. Thick enough that I immediately knew there was cash inside. My pulse started racing. I opened it carefully and counted almost $4,000 in $100 bills. No note. No explanation. Just cash. Evelyn never carried cash. She paid for everything with cards, even groceries. I heard footsteps upstairs and shoved the envelope back exactly where I found it. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped her purse. That night at dinner, I watched her differently. She laughed at a commercial on television while cutting grilled chicken on her plate, completely relaxed, completely normal. And somehow that made it worse. Because I kept thinking about the envelope. About the tears in the garage. About 20 years of silence sitting between us at the dinner table like a third person neither of us acknowledged. "You okay?" she asked suddenly. I realized I had been staring at her. "Yeah. Just tired." She gave me a small smile and reached for my hand. "You have been distant lately." There was concern in her voice. Real concern. Which confused me even more. Someone hiding something should act nervous, right? Guilty. Defensive. But Evelyn acted sad. That was the part one could not understand. The following Monday, I came home earlier than usual because a client canceled a meeting. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Evelyn's car was already there. The garage door was halfway open. I walked inside quietly and heard her talking on the phone. Her voice sounded strained. "I know," she whispered. "I just need more time." Silence. Then, "No, he still does not know anything." Every muscle in my body locked up. I stood completely still near the garage entrance, barely breathing. "Please," she said softly. "I cannot do this yet." Then footsteps. Fast footsteps. I stepped backward just before she entered the kitchen. She jumped slightly when she saw me. "Michael. You scared me." "Who were you talking to?" I asked casually. Too casually. She hesitated. Just for a second. "My sister." Lie. Evelyn's sister hated phone calls and barely spoke to anyone longer than 5 minutes. I nodded. "Anyway. Everything okay?" "Yeah," she answered quickly. "Just family stuff." Family stuff. That phrase echoed in my head all night. Around midnight, after Evelyn fell asleep, I quietly got out of bed and walked downstairs. Rain tapped softly against the windows while the grandfather clock in the hallway ticked through the silence. I do not know what I was looking for. Proof maybe. Or reassurance that I was imagining all this. Instead, I found something worse. Evelyn's planner sat on the kitchen counter partially open. I should have walked away. I know that. But I looked. Every Tuesday for the past year had the same handwritten initials in blue ink. S.M. Nothing else. Just 2 letters repeated over and over again like some coded ritual. And suddenly I realized this secret was bigger than I ever imagined. Tuesday came again, and I barely slept the night before. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those initials written over and over inside Evelyn's planner. S.M. I kept trying to convince myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe a charity donation. Maybe an old family debt. Maybe someone sick she was helping in secret. But deep down, another thought had already taken root, and I hated myself for it. What if my wife had another life I knew nothing about? At 8:40 that morning, Evelyn walked into the kitchen wearing a dark navy coat and carrying the same leather purse with the cash envelope inside. She poured herself coffee like it was any ordinary day. "You are quiet this morning," she said. Long week, I answered. My voice sounded strange even to me. She studied my face for a second like she sensed something shifting between us. Then she walked over, straightened the collar of my shirt, and smiled softly. Do not work too hard today. That simple gesture almost broke me. Because that was the problem with Evelyn. She was kind. Thoughtful. Gentle. She remembered birthdays. Sent handwritten thank you cards. Volunteered at animal shelters every Christmas. Nothing about her matched the picture forming in my mind, and yet the evidence kept piling up anyway. At exactly 9:15, the garage door opened. I waited 10 seconds before grabbing my keys and following her. My heart hammered so hard during the drive downtown that I thought I might turn around twice. Traffic crawled through the financial district while gray clouds covered the city skyline. Evelyn stayed 3 cars ahead of me almost the entire way, her black Lexus moving steadily through intersections she clearly knew by memory. Then she pulled into the underground parking garage beneath Fairmont National Bank. I parked near the elevator but far enough away not to be seen. My palms were sweating. I watched Evelyn step out of her car, pause briefly beside the elevator doors, then look at her reflection in the mirrored wall. She fixed her hair carefully and took a deep breath before disappearing upstairs. Not nervous. Not guilty. Sad. That was the word that kept haunting me. Sad. I followed her into the bank about 2 minutes later. Fairmont National looked more like a luxury hotel lobby than a bank. Marble floors. Chandeliers. Quiet music playing somewhere overhead. Everyone spoke in low polished voices. Evelyn stood near a private reception desk speaking to a man in an expensive gray suit who looked around 65 years old. Silver hair. Thin glasses. Calm expression. He handed her a small key attached to a white tag. Locker 214. My stomach dropped instantly. They shook hands like people who knew each other well. Then he escorted her toward a secured elevator near the back wall marked private access only. I moved quickly toward one of the marble columns before either of them noticed me. A young receptionist smiled politely at me. Can I help you, sir? Actually, yes, I said, trying to sound normal. I think my wife may have left her phone here earlier this week. The lie came out smoother than I expected. The receptionist checked her computer briefly before shaking her head. I am sorry, sir. But I barely heard her. Because behind her, the private elevator doors opened again. And for one split second before they closed, I saw Evelyn holding something against her chest inside the vault level below. It looked like a photograph. And she was crying again. When Evelyn finally came back upstairs nearly 40 minutes later, I almost did not recognize her expression. She looked emotionally drained, like someone who had just visited a grave nobody else knew existed. Her eyes were slightly red, but she moved calmly beside the older man in the gray suit while he spoke quietly to her near the elevator. I stayed partially hidden behind the marble column pretending to scroll through emails on my phone. Same time next week, he asked softly. Evelyn nodded once. Unless she changes her mind. The second I heard those words, every thought in my head stopped. She. Not it. Not paperwork. Not money. A person. The older man noticed me standing nearby and immediately lowered his voice. Evelyn turned slightly in my direction, and I looked away fast enough that she did not seem to recognize me. A few seconds later, she walked toward the exit holding her purse tightly against her chest. I waited until she disappeared through the revolving doors before moving. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I should have left right then. Any reasonable husband would have gone home and confronted his wife directly. But curiosity mixed with fear does strange things to people. Before I could lose my nerve, I walked toward the private reception desk. The same receptionist looked up politely. Sir, are you still needing assistance? Actually, I said carefully, the gentleman who was just helping my wife downstairs asked me to stop by his office. The lie felt dangerous this time. The receptionist smiled immediately. Mr. Whitmore. I nodded even though I had never heard the name before in my life. Third floor. Office 312. I thanked her and headed toward the elevators before she could ask anything else. Office 312 sat at the end of a quiet hallway lined with framed financial awards and black and white photographs of Boston from the 1950s. The nameplate beside the door read Samuel Whitmore, Senior Private Accounts Director. My chest tightened again. S.M. The initials from Evelyn's planner. I stood outside the office for nearly 30 seconds debating whether to knock. Then the door suddenly opened. Samuel Whitmore looked mildly surprised to see me standing there. Up close, he appeared older than I first thought. Early 70s maybe. Expensive suit. Sharp blue eyes. The kind of man who noticed details immediately. Can I help you? He asked. I forced a polite smile. I think there may have been a misunderstanding. I am Michael Carter. Evelyn Carter's husband. The moment I said Evelyn's name, something changed in his expression. Not panic. More like concern. He glanced down the empty hallway before speaking again. I see. Silence stretched between us. I think my wife has been meeting you here for many years, I continued carefully. And I would like to understand why. Samuel studied me for a long moment without answering. Then he sighed quietly and stepped aside from the doorway. Mr. Carter, he said, there are some truths that people keep hidden because they are ashamed. And some truths they keep hidden because they are trying to protect the people they love. My stomach twisted instantly. Protect me from what? He looked genuinely uncomfortable now. That is not my story to tell. Then whose story is it? Samuel hesitated again before saying something that made my blood run cold. Have you ever heard the name Sophie? The hallway suddenly felt too small to breathe inside. The second Samuel Whitmore said the name Sophie, something deep inside me reacted before my brain even could. It felt familiar somehow, like hearing a melody you have not heard since childhood but still recognize instantly. I stared at him, waiting for an explanation that never came. Who is Sophie? I asked quietly. Samuel's face tightened. Mr. Carter, I truly believe your wife intended to tell you eventually. Eventually? I repeated. It has been 23 years. He looked down briefly before motioning toward the office behind him. Please. Sit down. I followed him inside almost mechanically. His office overlooked downtown Boston through massive glass windows streaked with rain. The room smelled faintly of old books and coffee. Diplomas lined the walls beside photographs of charity events and business leaders shaking hands. Samuel closed the door carefully before sitting behind his desk. I cannot disclose private client information, he said calmly. Then why mention her? Name it all. I snapped. My voice came out sharper than I intended. Samuel folded his hands together. Because I think you deserve to understand at least one thing. Your wife is not hiding another family. Relief flashed through me so fast it almost hurt. But it lasted only a second. Then what is she hiding? Samuel hesitated again. I was beginning to hate that hesitation. There are people, he said slowly, who spend their entire lives carrying grief they believe they earned. I leaned forward. Stop talking in riddles. For the first time, Samuel looked directly uncomfortable. 20 years ago, Evelyn came to this bank asking for help setting up a private trust account connected to someone named Sophie. My pulse quickened immediately. A child? Samuel did not answer directly, but his silence said enough. Whose child? I asked. Mr. Carter, whose child? This time my voice echoed louder through the office. Samuel removed his glasses slowly and rubbed his eyes like a man exhausted by secrets. You should ask your wife that question. The room suddenly felt suffocating. I stood up so quickly the chair rolled backward against the carpet. A child. Dear God. My mind immediately went somewhere dark. An affair. A daughter hidden from me for decades. Another life running parallel to ours while I sat at home believing my marriage was perfect. I thought about every anniversary. Every vacation. Every quiet Sunday morning drinking coffee beside Evelyn while she carried this secret alone. The betrayal hit me so hard I physically felt sick. Did she ever love me? I asked before I could stop myself. Samuel looked genuinely saddened by the question. I believe she loves you very deeply. Then why lie to me? Sometimes shame becomes larger than truth, he answered softly. I laughed bitterly under my breath. That does not even make sense. Samuel reached toward a file cabinet beside his desk, then stopped himself halfway like he had almost made a mistake. But I saw it. A file folder partially visible inside the drawer. Across the tab was handwritten one word. Sophie. My eyes locked onto it immediately. Samuel noticed too late and quietly pushed the drawer shut. Mr. Carter, he said firmly, now, whatever happens next, do not assume the worst about your wife. But it was already too late for that. Because as I stood there staring at the closed file cabinet, I realized something terrifying. I did not actually know what the worst was anymore. I drove home in complete silence with the windshield wipers pushing rain back and forth across the glass like a metronome counting down to something terrible. Every memory I had of Evelyn suddenly felt unstable. I kept replaying our entire marriage searching for clues I should have noticed sooner. There had been signs. Small ones. Moments that never made sense until now. Evelyn refusing to throw away old birthday cards. The way she sometimes stared at children in grocery stores with an expression I could never explain. The nights I woke up and found her sitting alone in the living room after midnight with tears in her eyes claiming she just could not sleep. 23 years together, and somehow I had missed an entire hidden world inside her. By the time I pulled into the driveway, Evelyn's Lexus was already there. The kitchen lights glowed warmly through the windows like nothing had changed. Like my life had not just cracked open downtown inside a bank office. I sat in the car for almost 5 minutes gripping the steering wheel, trying to decide whether to confront her immediately. Part of me wanted to storm inside demanding answers. Another part of me was terrified of hearing them. When I finally walked through the front door, I found Evelyn standing at the stove stirring soup while soft jazz played from the speaker near the refrigerator. The smell of garlic and rosemary filled the kitchen. Ordinary. Completely ordinary. She turned and smiled when she saw me. You are home early. I stared at her face searching for guilt, but all I saw was exhaustion. Traffic was terrible, I muttered. How was your day? She asked. There it was again. That question. So simple and normal it almost felt cruel now. I wanted to scream, my day. I discovered my wife has been hiding a child from me for 20 years. Instead I just said, fine. Evelyn studied me quietly for a moment. Michael, are you sure everything is okay? The concern in her voice sounded real. That was the worst part. If she had acted cold or distant, maybe this would have been easier. But Evelyn looked at me the same way she always had. Like I mattered to her. Like she loved me. During dinner, I barely touched my food. Evelyn noticed immediately. You hate my soup now, she teased gently. Normally I would have smiled. Instead I asked the question before I could stop myself. Who is Sophie? The spoon slipped from Evelyn's hand and hit the table with a sharp metallic sound. For one horrifying second, all color disappeared from her face. She looked like someone who had just seen a ghost standing in the kitchen. Neither of us moved. Neither of us breathed. Finally she whispered, "Where did you hear that name?" There was no denial. No confusion. Just fear. Real fear. My chest tightened instantly. So she is real. Evelyn slowly sat down across from me like her legs suddenly could not hold her anymore. "Michael, who is she?" I asked again. My voice cracked this time despite every effort to stay calm. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears almost immediately. She pressed both hands together tightly in front of her mouth before speaking. "I wanted to tell you," she whispered. "For years I wanted to." "Tell me what?" She looked down at the table, unable to meet my eyes. Then she said 5 words that changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. "Sophie is my daughter." The room went completely silent after Evelyn said those words. I could hear the rain outside. The ticking clock near the hallway. The faint hum of the refrigerator behind us. "Sophie is my daughter." My mind repeated the sentence over and over, but it still did not feel real. I stared at my wife across the kitchen table, waiting for the rest of the explanation that never came. Evelyn looked terrified. Not terrified of being caught. Terrified of losing me. "You have a daughter," I finally said slowly, trying to process the words. "And you hid her from me for 23 years. Tears rolled down Evelyn's cheeks immediately. "I did not hide her because I wanted another life," she whispered. "Then why?" My voice rose despite myself. "How does someone forget to mention they have a child?" "I never forgot," she said quietly. "Not for one single day." That answer hit harder than I expected. Because suddenly I understood what those Tuesday visits really were. Not meetings. Not affairs. Grief. 20 years of grief carefully folded into one secret hour every week. Evelyn wiped her face with trembling hands before continuing. "I was 19 when I had Sophie." I leaned back slowly in my chair, unable to speak. "It was before I met you," she added quickly. "Long before." Part of the pressure in my chest eased hearing that, but another part tightened even more. "Where is she now?" Evelyn looked down at the table. "I do not know." The answer stunned me. "What do you mean you do not know?" She closed her eyes briefly before speaking again. "My parents forced me to give her up." I blinked in disbelief. Evelyn came from one of those old-money New England families obsessed with appearances. Her father had been a well-known attorney. Her mother chaired charity galas and country club committees. Everything about their lives revolved around reputation. Suddenly pieces started clicking together in my head. "They made you hide the pregnancy," I said quietly. Evelyn nodded once. "They sent me away to stay with an aunt in Vermont for almost a year. Everyone was told I was studying abroad." Her voice sounded distant now, like she was speaking from inside a memory she hated revisiting. "After Sophie was born, my father arranged a private adoption through someone he trusted. Samuel Whitmore. That was why he knew everything." "And you never saw her again?" Evelyn shook her head slowly. "Not officially." My stomach tightened again. "What does that mean?" She stood up suddenly and walked toward the living room window, wrapping her arms around herself tightly. "A few years after we got married, Samuel contacted me. He told me Sophie was healthy and safe. He was the only person who ever showed me kindness through any of it." I remained frozen at the kitchen table listening. "He helped me set up the trust account," she continued softly. "Every Tuesday I go there to add money for her. Birthday money. College money. Emergency money. Anything she might need one day." I thought about the cash envelope in her purse. The photographs. The tears. 20 years of quietly loving a daughter she was never allowed to keep. "Why did you not tell me?" I asked again, but this time the anger in my voice had faded into something else. "Hurt maybe." Evelyn turned toward me slowly, her mascara smudged beneath exhausted eyes. "Because I was ashamed," she whispered. "And because by the time I realized I could trust you with the truth, I had already lied for too long." Neither of us slept that night. Around 2 in the morning, I found Evelyn sitting alone in the living room wrapped in a gray blanket staring at the dark backyard through the windows. The television was off. The house was silent except for the rain tapping softly against the glass. She looked smaller somehow. Fragile. Like the weight she had carried for 20 years was finally crushing her now that it had been exposed. I stood near the doorway for a moment before speaking. "Why Tuesdays?" Evelyn looked up slowly, surprised I was still awake. "What? Why every Tuesday?" She lowered her eyes toward the coffee table. "Because Sophie was born on a Tuesday." The answer hit me harder than I expected. I sat down carefully across from her while she pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "After the adoption," she continued softly, "I promised myself I would never let a week pass without thinking about her. Tuesdays became the only way I knew how to survive it." There was no manipulation in her voice. No attempt to excuse what she had done. Just exhaustion. Raw and honest exhaustion. For the first time since this nightmare started, my anger began mixing with something else. Sadness. Not only for me. For her too. "Did you ever try to find Sophie?" I asked. Evelyn gave a small painful laugh under her breath. "Every single year." She stood up slowly and walked toward the hallway closet. A few seconds later, she returned carrying a faded cardboard storage box. She placed it gently on the coffee table between us like it contained something sacred. My chest tightened immediately. "What is that?" "Everything I was never allowed to give her." Evelyn opened the box carefully. Inside were dozens of birthday cards organized by age. Tiny baby shoes. School supplies still wrapped in plastic. A stuffed rabbit with one bent ear. Letters. Hundreds of letters. I picked one up slowly. The envelope read, "For Sophie's 10th birthday." Another said, "For your first day of college someday." My throat tightened so suddenly I could barely breathe. "You wrote to her all these years?" Evelyn nodded. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks now. "Samuel kept telling me there was a chance she might want contact someday. I was terrified she would think I abandoned her willingly." She handed me an old photograph from the box. A younger Evelyn stood outside a small hospital wearing a pale blue coat. She could not have been older than 19. Her face looked devastated. In her arms was a newborn wrapped in a pink blanket. "That is the only picture I ever got with her," she whispered. I stared at the photo for several seconds. Then something else caught my attention. Around the baby's wrist was a tiny silver bracelet engraved with one word. Sophie. Suddenly the child stopped feeling abstract. She became real. A real little girl who grew up somewhere without her mother. Without knowing this entire box existed. "Does she know about you?" I asked quietly. Evelyn wiped her eyes. "Samuel believes she found out she was adopted when she turned 18. But she never contacted you?" Evelyn shook her head slowly. "No." The silence between us stretched again, heavy and emotional. Then I remembered something Samuel had said downstairs at the bank. "Unless she changes her mind." "Wait," I said suddenly. "You told Samuel something about her changing her mind." Evelyn froze instantly. I saw fear flash across her face again. "Michael, what does that mean?" She looked down at her hands before answering. 3 months ago, Samuel contacted me because Sophie finally responded to one of the letters. Every nerve in my body went cold. The words barely registered at first. Sophie responded. After 20 years of silence, after thousands of dollars saved in secret and hundreds of unopened letters sitting inside that bank vault, Evelyn's daughter had finally answered her. When? I asked quietly. Evelyn looked nervous again, but this time it was different. Not fear of being exposed. Fear of hope. 3 months ago, she whispered. Samuel called me after she contacted the trust office asking questions about the account. My mind raced trying to process everything. And you never told me? Evelyn looked down immediately. I was afraid. Afraid of what? Tears filled her eyes again. That if I finally found her, I might lose you. That sentence stayed with me for a long moment. Because for the first time since this entire nightmare began, I realized something important. Evelyn had not spent 20 years building another life behind my back. She had spent 20 years mourning the life stolen from her before we ever met. Did you meet Sophie? I asked. Evelyn shook her head slowly. No. She asked for time. I leaned back against the couch, emotionally exhausted. So every Tuesday, I go to the bank because Samuel updates me there, she said softly. Sometimes there is news. Sometimes there is nothing. Suddenly all those mysterious Tuesdays looked completely different in my mind. Not secret affairs. Not lies designed to betray me. They were tiny acts of survival. Weekly rituals holding together a wound that never healed. Evelyn reached into the storage box again and carefully handed me a folded piece of paper. This came 2 weeks ago, she whispered. I unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was neat but hesitant. Dear Evelyn, I do not know if I am ready to call you Mom yet. But I wanted you to know I received the letters. All of them. I cried reading that sentence. Not because I was emotional. Because I suddenly understood how much pain existed inside one family built entirely around silence. The letter continued. I used to think nobody wanted me. Samuel told me the truth after my adoptive father passed away last year. I still have questions. But maybe someday we can talk. At the bottom of the page was a simple signature. Sophie. I handed the letter back carefully, almost afraid to damage it. Where is she now? I asked. Evelyn hesitated before answering. About 30 minutes from here. I stared at her in disbelief. All this time? She nodded slowly. She moved to Boston last year. Samuel thought it was coincidence at first. Suddenly I remembered something strange from months earlier. A young blonde woman working at the coffee shop near my office. Evelyn had gone unusually quiet after meeting her one afternoon. At the time, I thought she was simply tired. Now my heart started pounding again. The girl at the cafe, I said slowly. Evelyn's eyes widened. You noticed her? That was Sophie. Tears rolled down Evelyn's cheeks as she nodded silently. I leaned forward, completely stunned. You were standing 10 feet away from your daughter and never told her who you were. Evelyn broke down crying then. Real uncontrollable crying. She smiled at me, Michael. Every Tuesday morning she smiled at me while handing me coffee, and I was too scared to tell her the truth. I moved beside her on the couch without even thinking about it and wrapped my arms around her shaking shoulders. For several minutes neither of us spoke. The rain outside had finally stopped, and somewhere in the distance morning birds had started singing. 20 years of secrets had almost destroyed us. But somehow, sitting there together in the quiet living room, it felt like the truth had finally given us a chance to heal instead. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart, please like the video and follow for more emotional stories like this.